Looking back on the week that was and forward to the week ahead. It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Here are your hosts, Brian Drake and Dwain McFarland.
All across the fantasy universe, welcome one and all back to the Fantasy Football Hustle, powered by Pro Football Focus. I am your host, Brian Drake. Check me out Sundays, 7 to 9 Eastern on SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio, hosting Pro Football Focus Game Day. It's a great time, rocking and rolling over there. Boy, we got a good one for you guys today. I know last week I explained to you guys a little bit how we're evolving here at the Hustle, right? We got Dwain. He's kind of busy over there hanging out with some Matthew Berry guy. I don't know. Maybe you've heard of him. So what I decided to do is say, let me get my Rolodex out. Who do I know that I can talk to about fantasy football? And tonight I came across two of the very best. If you want to talk about film work, you want to talk about auction strategy, legal advice, just general fantasy content, we're going to hit a home run tonight, because after 2 weeks of NFL games, we like to think we have it all figured out. You know, we know who stinks, we know who's great, and basically, why play the games anymore? But in the fantasy football world, we constantly need to be evaluating our rosters. Self-scouting is how we see potential weaknesses before they ruin our seasons. So if you're 2-0, you're 1-1, heaven forbid you're 0-2, this show here today is the day. I got two of the best and brightest minds in fantasy here to help me how to look objectively at your own rosters. Which players are we out on? Which offenses should we be buying into? And other strategic trips that we can employ to give us an edge weekly. Of course, I'm referring to the great Matt Waldman of FootballGuys and creator of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio. No stranger to the hustle. You can find him on Twitter at Matt Waldman, and of course at MattWaldmanRSP.com. And then my buddy, Drew Davenport at Drew Davenport NFL, also a Football Guys and the Auction Brief podcast. Find him at Drew Davenport NFL. One of my best friends, not only in the fantasy space, but in real life. Gentlemen, welcome to the Fantasy Football Hustle. How are you tonight?
Fantastic, buddy. Thanks for having me.
It's doing great. I mean, I'm actually Dwain McFarland, but I've got my Matt Waldman mask on here. I'm trying to do the Georgia accent as best as I can.
Yeah, well, everyone comments on Dwain's hair. I wish I had hair like that. If I just sit and look like this, straight to the camera, people think, oh, man, Drake's got a whole lot going on. They don't understand, like, the alopecia and the bald spot in the back, but I'm doing better than my dad, who was bald at 18. So,
hey, I'm same here. I'm just all white underneath all this now, so I just wear caps all the time at this point, or I rock the mohawk occasionally and freak my wife out, and then shave it all off again. So there we go. Those types of things.
I saw my nephew. This kid's playing high school football. He had the most beautiful head of hair. He looks like Trevor Lawrence out there. And he shows up one day to my house to go swimming. He's cut all his hair off. Like, what are you doing? Never do that. If you've got that hair, keep it. Let it flow, my friend. My
nephew, he had the flowing locks, and then he cut it for a mullet, which apparently is popular now. And then he had a mustache. And I was like, man, I don't even know who this kid is. I mean, he's 22 now. It's a little bit odd for me because I watched him grow up. But
Drew, we got like the Love Boat coming back. We've got Quantum Leap coming back, and now we have bullets coming back. I think there's something wrong here.
I don't get it. I will refrain from further comment.
I live in upstate New York, which is essentially like North Alabama, if you're above the city. So, trust me, mullets have never gone out of style up here in central New York. But you guys are here to talk fantasy. Our folks out here listening are excited. We even got our old pal Shirley Shapiro in the chat. Drew, she's a fan of yours, says she's been drafting in auctions for years and has become a better drafter listening to your work. And Shirley always keeps us on our toes here in the hustle. And if you're listening to the pod, make sure you go over to youtube.com. Check out the Fantasy Football Hustle. Just search it. You can find it. Subscribe. Like the show. You'll find all the great content over there. But I want to kick things off here, Matt, by asking you, 2 weeks into the season now, how quickly are you ready to throw away your priors from the summer? We had all summer to sit there and make up all these stories about players, narratives we thought was going to happen. Now we've got 2 data points to learn from after this offseason. So we've seen a couple of weeks. How do you view your rosters? And maybe what has changed from what you thought 2 weeks ago?
I tend to be the more patient sort. And I think that what's important to understand is that you have to play to your strengths. And so if your strengths are patience and building, where you know that you can pick up worthwhile players and wait out guys who may have to, deal with some offensive adjustments, or they just had, there were logical reasons for why their performance weren't what you expected from them, then you go with that. But if you're good at wheeling and dealing and trading and going around that route, then play to that strength and consider what you can get for that. For me, I tend to look at it this way. When I look at certain players where maybe their target, they haven't been very productive, say as a receiver, but the targets are there and the target percentages are valuable. A good example for me would be Hunter Renfrow. Hunter Renfrow, I was high on. People are kind of down on him because you look at the 17 target game that Devontae Adams had in week 1. But he still had, I think, something close to 20% of the target share, Renfrow did, along with Waller. That tells you right there that even with a monster target game for Adams, that Renfro's still going to be involved. And he was involved last week. He had 2 fumbles at the end of the game on consecutive plays, but that's unusual for him. And you could probably go look up at Jerry Rice's tape and see him do some of that type of thing. So I'll look at things like that. Now, on the other hand, if you're looking at someone like, a running back where the offensive line is struggling severely, the running back still may be good, but he's going to be in situations where the offensive line is, for every 2 or 3 good carries, he's going to have 1 awful carry that might erase a good portion of the yardage that he has. And it may also limit how many carries he's getting forward based on game scripts. So then in that situation, I might be determining whether I can trade him and get some value in a package deal by packaging up players who I have at a surplus, say surplus wide receiver talent, a combination of maybe a surplus quarterback or wide receiver or tight end, and packaging them with that running back to get something of immediate help for me that I think can be more helpful long term, or hopefully get somebody off free agency that I think can supplement what I'm doing while I wait out and hope that maybe the team will make adjustments with their offensive line, that maybe it's not by adding talent, because they probably, if they had the talent, they'd already have plugged it in instead of the ones that they lost. But that instead, maybe being able to change what they do with their scheme tweaks enough to say, we can't run inside to the left without doing certain things, and now we're going to have to change that up, or that there's better matchups on the horizon where maybe the combination of their line play, some of the injuries and the lack of coherence or of cohesiveness, and then on top of that, tough competition could drive those things. So I'm assessing the level of competition, the amount of surplus I have on my roster, along with the context of what type of opportunities they're getting, to determine whether I'm going to stay or go.
Now, Drew, when you do this kind of for a living, like we do, and you're really in tune to fantasy football, but you're playing in home leagues, just like all our listeners out there, they're in their home leagues with their buddies. They're trying to win a couple of $100 and all the bragging rights. You did the work this offseason. Chances are you probably have some pretty good players on your roster, and talent, who has talent when you look around in your leagues and who doesn't have talent. So I think it benefits still the sharp player. Even if some of your draft picks aren't hitting, which players to go and attack on other teams. And after 2 weeks, I think I'd love to get your opinion on this. Do you think this is the time to pounce and say, you know what, I got to go get this guy now because his value is only going to go up, and I might have a piece that I can move today, like maybe a Chase Edmonds who had a good week 1. We got to get him off here because the wheels are going to fall off and I'm never going to have a trade chip. So 2 weeks in, how are you attacking other teams in your league, maybe on the trade market?
Yeah, I like this conversation because trading is one of my favorite things to do in home leagues. And it's not necessarily because I'm ripping anybody off or anything like that. I think that people tend to attack trades in a kind of a weird way where they're just trying to get over on somebody. And that's not how I do it. I really like to just, I'm going through the rosters and seeing where I can fill someone else's need. And one of the things that Matt talked about that I absolutely love is that we have a situation where we had opinions that were leading up to the season that may have been just incorrect opinions. And there is a big difference between, hey, let's give this some time, and that was a wrong opinion. After 2 weeks, it's not too early to say, hey, we were wrong about that.
Right.
And an example of that I've been given recently is I was really big on KJ Osborne because I thought that they would run more 11 personnel and get 3 wide receivers on the field more. That has not proven to be the case yet. And Osborne's usage has been right in line with what he did last year. So I'm quick to move off that. I don't care. I was big on Osborne. I got him at the end of a lot of drafts. And I said, nah, I'm out. He's had 2 catches in 2 straight weeks. That's exactly what he did last year. I'm fine moving off him after 2 weeks. On the other hand, there's a guy like Tom Brady. He's dealing with just cluster injuries at the wide receiver position, on the offensive line. He's good enough. He's been around long enough. He's going to overcome some of this, and some of these guys are going to get healthy. Evans will come back from suspension, whatever the case may be. Brady's going to be fine. So there's 2 different situations there. And I really feel like there's an evolution of the season that people don't pay enough attention to. At the beginning of the year, you're going to have teams that are struggling because they're learning new systems, learning new personnel, how to work with people. And then that's going to get better. And there are some teams that's not going to get better. And right now, like one of those teams, you look at the Ravens defense and how they got destroyed this past week. There were miscommunications. There's injuries again, again, cluster injuries in the secondary. So I think that a team like the Ravens can evolve and be a better pass defense than they did at the end of the year. Right now, they're terrible, but you can't get away from the fact that the season is going to evolve and get different as we go. So right now, you got to make your judgments right now, and you got to try to assess how's that going to go in the next 3 to 4 weeks when you're looking at trade targets. So that's a really long-winded way to say you can see those evolutions coming if you pay attention, and other people may not. So you're not ripping them off. You're just saying, hey, I think the evolution is going to go this way.
Those are great examples. Those are great examples you gave, of how that works. I think people need to hear that.
Thank you.
When you're looking at teams maybe to trade for, or you're looking at your own squad, what I like to say, and we've said it here on the Hustle all summer long, is you want to get away from bad teams. And I look at some of my rosters and I go, I don't want to be overloaded maybe with Jaguars or Bears. And if you look at the beginning of this season right now, I went and did a little math here. And I know I was told there would be no math, but if you look at the teams in the NFL that have 2 touchdowns on the season, 2 offensive touchdowns, that's awful. We've played 2 weeks. Seattle, Tampa, Indy, Houston, Pittsburgh, Denver, Dallas. Those teams were combined 6-6-2. You want to extrapolate it a little more? Teams that only have 3 offensive touchdowns, the Vikings, Patriots, Bengals, Titans. Combine all those teams, you're looking at 8-12-2. And I bet there's a lot of you out there who've got DK Metcalf. Maybe you got some players on Indianapolis, maybe Dameon Pierce. Lord knows, we'll see it Thursday night with these Pittsburgh wide receivers. Nothing's happening for them. Dallas, we can give them an excuse without Dak, but Cooper Rush came in and they won a big game. The Patriots, the Bengals. So really, when you get guys, and Matt, I'll throw this to you because you're kind of the film guy. Maybe you've seen some things on some of these players. I mean, you can get that vibe early. Like, this offense is going nowhere. It's a bad play caller or it's a bad quarterback. And I want to get out from under that as soon as I can, because as the season goes on and those point differentials change, because we know how guys are in our fantasy, they look and they go, well, this guy's got 50 more points than that guy. Why would I trade for him? They're never going to trade for DK Metcalf in another 3 weeks when he's sitting here with, no touchdowns and 14 catches.
Yeah, and I think that there are absolutely examples of players that if you started to see some, even if you picked a player, but you knew there were some worries about them, like, okay, well, DK Metcalf's going to be playing with Geno Smith instead of Russell Wilson. That's a big difference. Even if Geno Smith helped engineer a win against Russell Wilson's team, you look at that situation and realize that the upside with what Russell Wilson's going to probably make adjustments with compared to what Geno Smith's going to do is far different. So at that standpoint, if you're getting confirmation to realize that, whereas with Wilson, he had a 340-yard game in week 1. In week 2, he had, I believe I charted it this week in one of my columns. I mean, he's had 7 drops, receiver drops, and he had multiple red drops in the end zone from receivers where you could say some of them were tougher catches, but they were ones you'd expect to make that were placed in the hands of his targets. A lot of drawn interference penalties. If you look at, Geno Smith, and you track those types of things, are you seeing that kind of situation where the opportunity's there, but the execution hasn't happened yet? And as Drew alluded to, a lot of that is getting on the same page, being able to recognize and think quickly without having to think too long about it. So it's just second reaction. And that comes with the rapport of being on the field and having that experience on the stage, not just a summer's worth of practice. So as they get used to each other, and the receiver understands how it's really going to go in the game, that starts to click. I don't see that happening as much for Geno Smith and DK Metcalf as I would for, say, Russell Wilson and Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy and even his backup tight ends or backup receivers. And you could see how close it was for a guy like Wilson compared to what you'd see with a team like Smith and Metcalf. So yeah, if you have a player who's highly touted, but the supporting cast, you can tell, isn't going to turn into a major surprise, then get off of that if you can, or if you see that the teams are not that they've played aren't very good. Like when Saquon Barkley, certainly has played great football with the Giants thus far, at least for that first week against Tennessee. But watching that game, I thought the Giants are not very good.
They're a fraud. There's no worse team in history of the NFL. They're terrible.
Well, you're an Eagles fan, but but the Titans are, I looked at that and go, the Titans defense looks bad. I mean, this looks like a rough defense. And after the shellacking they got from the Bills, there was a little bit more validation to that idea. So, that's the thing that I would consider, is that if you have a player who's performed high, but your priors weren't that they were going to be great at it, and the teams they faced, you've seen them 1 week against a team that's supposed to be bad, they play well against, and then they play a team that's good, and they're just as bad as the bad team that they played the week before, might be time to sell high on that player.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think about all the time is, and I think I can make it real simple, like, and it may not be this simple, but let me try to crystallize it real quick. If you thought something about a player, and like I said, the KJ Osborne example, if you were thinking something coming into the season and it was confirmed by the first couple of weeks, I think you should feel pretty comfortable with that, because I think there's sometimes that we get into the situation where we look back at think about how you're going to feel on Thanksgiving when you're looking back at week 2. Things are going to change wildly and drastically. Mm-hmm. So moving off of players, it is difficult after only 2 weeks. And I caution you not to be too hasty. But I have a reputation in my leagues, especially my home leagues, about being the guy who's willing to just dump somebody onto the wire because I'd rather have somebody else pick him up and have to deal with whether or not to start him. And I think a guy like that might be like a Robert Woods this year, who is somebody who should get plenty of usage and is running a ton of routes and playing a ton of snaps, but he's going to throw up a lot of 5-for-41s. And do you really care about that long term? If you throw him onto the wire, somebody else is going to have to put him on the roster. So I want to, I don't want to sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, because I do believe that you have to have some patience. But if you came into the season, you were like, I think X, and then X happens for 2 weeks, I think you can feel pretty good about X. It may not be perfect, but for the most part, that's how I feel about it. And I think that has been fairly successful for me long term.
I also look at teams like Cincinnati. We could have a whole show just on the Bengals, and the Bucks. The Bucks are just ravaged by injuries right now. What's the two things that are worrying me about these teams right now is, number one, offensive line cohesiveness. The Bengals need to get it together as a unit that really hasn't played together before. The Bucks are replacing 3 starters from last year, but also look at those quarterbacks. You've got Joe Burrow, who had surgery. It wasn't anything bad. I think, would he have an appendectomy or something like that? And he missed a good part of training camp. Tom Brady, God knows what he was going on with Giselle, and he missed a good part of training camp. So we shouldn't be surprised that those teams are struggling right now, because there's such limited time for these guys to actually practice. When you think about the number of padded practices that NFL teams have, people think, oh my God, they're practicing every day out there just banging their heads into each other. They're really not. There's a lot of walkthroughs and film days. It's not just killing each other. in 11 on 11 out there. It doesn't happen. So we can really springboard into a couple of these teams here and talk about some of these players. And the first guy, and everybody was down on him in the offseason, so maybe your priors are right. It's Zeke Elliott. If you look at Zeke right now, oh my Lord, it is bad news. So we could say, oh, well, they had Cooper Rush. Well, Cooper Rush just went and beat the Bengals, okay? He's got less than 11 points in half-point PPR right now. He's just not getting done. He's not explosive. Matt, are you seeing anything with the film of Zeke Elliott? Is he just cooked?
No, I would disagree with you completely on that.
Okay.
front. And I think there's a lot of slander going on about Ezekiel Elliott, about the idea that he's cooked, that he's not as good as Pollard. Zeke Elliott looks as quick and spry as he ever has. He is quick to be able to, he's a quick cutter. He's got good short area change of direction. He's able to find creases. I was just watching his tape again this afternoon, and what you're finding is that he makes a lot of his yardage. The problem is that just like a lot of running backs who are behind struggling offensive lines or with quarterbacks that they want to dare you to beat him, is that he's facing 8 or 9 men boxes way more often than Pollard does. He's asked to be in those short yardage situations. And as a result of that, what you have is that for every 5, 7, 14-yard gain he has, he'll have a couple of -4s or 3s or 2-yard gains because the offensive line is allowing someone into the backfield in situations that's too soon. And so the problem with him isn't that he's not a good runner anymore, that he's cooked. Far from it. The problem is that teams know that they need to let Cooper Rush try and beat them. They'd much rather have Cooper Rush beat them than to play 6 or 5 in the box against Ezekiel Elliott. Because if you do that with Elliott ever, then you're going to wind up in a situation where you're going to see Elliott bust 20, 30, 40-yard gains. And that's been that way for years. So really the issue now is that this offense with Elliott is, from a fantasy perspective, one where you're getting limited returns with him, because by the time they're in the third or fourth quarter, they're not ahead in most situations, or they're in situations where the defense still wants to force the quarterback to be the game winner for them, or to put the game away, because they know if they let Elliott try and beat them, that he will. And I think that's the difference.
Man, I saw a linebacker, I think it was from an opponent of the Cowboys, and he said, we knew, it was from Tampa Bay, and after week 1, he said, we knew they would abandon the run. He said, every running play that they run, he goes, they're trying to go bounce outside, and he said, they're going to abandon the run in the second half. And so far this year, Dallas is 5th in the NFL in terms of runs against 8 men in the box. So you guys were right on that. And they're also, just getting clobbered with trying to get yardage after yards per attempt after contact. I mean, Dallas is just getting smoked. They're 26, 2.5 yards of rushing after contact. So that everyone talked for years, Dallas has this great offensive line. Well, they don't anymore. So that could be a big issue. And we got people in the chat, Waldman, and they're fired up. They love the fact that you're saying to keep Zeke. So now let's extrapolate this a little more. Drew, you heard what Matt said about Zeke Elliott. Is there any way you're going out and trying to maybe buy? You can't buy any lower on Zeke Elliott right now. Geez, you could get him for your kicker. Is he a guy maybe you go, well, they're going to get Dak back. They're going to get Gallup back. Maybe James Washington comes back eventually. Remember, they signed him out of Pittsburgh. This offense could open up a little bit. And you could get Zeke. Maybe he's your flex. Maybe he's a backup bye week guy. But, I mean, is it worth going after him for your bench?
I tell you what, I'm going to say no. I understand the point, and I definitely don't hate the idea from the standpoint that if you can get him for the right price where you're not having to rely on him right now, maybe you're 2-0 and you got such a strong team, you can stick him on the bench and you're going to be able to ride this out. I think part of the appeal for me anyway, last year and coming into this year, was that he was their goal line guy who could still fall into the end zone 10 times. And it wouldn't really be difficult to find 10 touchdowns for him. So I still think that that's possible. So I'm not saying not to do it. A couple things concern me. The snap share, they're really about even right now. I mean, Zeke is playing more than half the snaps, but just barely. And he is getting more than half the carries. But what's interesting is that last year there was a lot of check down stuff that Zeke was getting that was propping up his value in the games when he didn't have a great rushing output. And that just hasn't happened. Although the funny part is he's actually ran 37 routes this year and Pollard's only ran 28. So there is I still believe in what Matt is saying, that he's not done. This isn't over at this point. So I don't mind your idea, Brian, but I want to be in the right situation. And that feels like a real kind of small situation that not a lot of people can be in. Otherwise, you're going to have to count on him in your starting lineup. And unless you're 2-0, I don't know that I want to jump into that right now.
And I think that that's a great point, because if you ask whether Zeke's cooked as a player, he's far from cooked. If you're asking about his fantasy situation, if you have him on your roster, you're probably not going to be able to get rid of him. And you probably shouldn't, for the reasons that you brought up, Brian. But as Drew alluded to, you really need to be in a scenario where you're looking at the waiver wire and you're trying to make package deals with some of the strengths of your team to be able to get a running back who can help you. And then hope that, Zeke does evolve into that situation where if he can be your running back 2 or running back 1 later in the year. But that's that window of opportunity for him. Otherwise you may be just stuck with him if you are in a start 3 running back league. He might be your 3rd running back, and you might even be taking chances on putting him on your bench for the wide receiver or the hot tight end matchup, or another running back who's getting more opportunity right now, because he's playing well, but they know how to stop him. Like you said, if they're saying in the second, we knew in the second half they're going to abandon the run. We know that and we also know that they're going to put Tony Pollard in known passing situations where they can run draws and screens with him, because that's what he's good at. Then Zeke does have a more limited profile. But it's like Adrian Peterson, when everyone said he was done. And then, he proved that even if it's for limited stints, that he can still run. He just winds up on bad teams because he's older, and they don't want to spend a lot of money on an older back when they can have a younger one for a cheaper price. So for Elliott, he's in that situation right now where if they get everybody back that they need, maybe they start to play ahead and get ahead early, and he can get those closeout carries that put him over the top.
Speaking of a guy who had a bunch of closeout carries last year, does anyone remember the Tennessee Titans were the number 1 seed in the AFC? And you probably drafted Derrick Henry in the middle to end of your first round this year. And now you're looking at a Tennessee Titans team who's 0-2. They've run 2 goal line plays this year. Plays inside the 5. Tennessee has run 2. So it's tough for Derrick Henry to get in there unless he's breaking a 70-yard run. They're 29th in the NFL in red zone plays. They only have 10 of them right now. So I'm looking at Derrick Henry, and I know there's a lot of guys in leagues who are saying, like, oh, man, I picked him up. He had the foot issue last year. Is he okay? So if you're looking at Derrick Henry right now, in a half-point PPR, he's running back 29. He's got 107 yards and 1 touchdown. Worst of all, he's got 1 target. Week 1, Dontrell Hilliard scored on 2 touchdown receptions. It's just killing you if you've got Henry. So, Matt, let me ask you off the top, because I always like getting your quick film review on these guys. Are you seeing anything with Henry? Oh, by the way, they just had Taylor Lewan go down to an injury, so that's not fun. I mean, this team just looks all sorts of out of sorts, to put it bluntly. Like, I don't know. He's kind of a guy I'm like, I don't want anything to do with this team going forward.
Yeah, it's tough because also their left guard and their right tackle were question marks before Lewan went down. And then the guy that was supposed to fill in 2 positions is out for the year, is on injured reserve. So they're really looking for 2 people to replace an offensive line that had already lost Roger Saffold to the Bills. And then I'm trying to remember who the other guy was, but they lost 2 players in the offseason. So this line was not the strength of the team in terms of known cohesive unit running. And so while they wanted to continue to go with that, here's the other added complication, because quick thing on film, Henry looks like Ezekiel Elliott in the same way, in the sense that he's fine when there's enough of a crease or enough decisions for him to be able to manipulate, and the line's executing reasonably well, meaning that if somebody loses one battle, he can find the cutback lane. He's going to be able to power through people. But if the line has two or more players miss assignments, he's in trouble, and that's happening too often right now. So when you consider this, you also have to add in the fact that, well, Ryan Tannehill, if they get down early and this defense is not looking good and they get down early, they're going to give Malik Willis as much experience as they can give him, like they did in that Bills game. And he could take over midway through the season, maybe, if they feel like that this is a loss for them, like that they're not going to be competitive, not going to have a chance to get into the playoffs. And while Malik Willis's legs may help open threats for Henry in an option sort of game, they like to run from the eye a lot. And are they going to switch that up? We don't know. And so as a result of that too, because his passing is still a work in progress, now that hurts Henry, because teams are like, we'll let Malik Willis run. We'll let Malik Willis try and beat us with his arm and try and piece together drives. And we'll just stop Henry. We'll just load the box up and know that this is what we have, because for every 25, 50, 60-yard gain Malik Willis has, there's a really good chance that he'll throw an interception or we'll hit him and force a fumble. So yeah, I'm on him.
Yeah, and the thing about, you guys were just talking about the offensive line, is it's crazy to me. Henry is now, Pro Football Reference says through 2 weeks that he is 43rd in the league in yards before contact. So it tells me that they are really struggling. And then the other thing that worries me about him, and not necessarily that he's just completely done, but in 2020 he was 5th in the league in yards after contact per attempt. And then in 2021, he fell to 15th in the league. And this year, so far through 2 games, he's 34th in the league in yards after contact. So I'm hearing people talking about his efficiency, and I'm not one of these guys who really is a high-level analytics guy. So I'm just listening to what they're saying. But this yards before contact plus yards after contact, those two don't bode well. Those two together, it's not a good combination.
You know what is a good combination? Who would have thought this before the season? If you bet, Joe Flacco and the New York Jets wide receivers, you'd win a trip to Paris, because looking at the Jets of all teams, the Jets, mind you, this is 48-year-old Joe Flacco out here. They're second in the NFL in plays per game. They're first in dropbacks. They're running tons of plays. The most plays per minute in the league are the New York Jets. But I want to look at their wide receiver group right here. Last week was the emergence of Garrett Wilson. So Garrett Wilson, the stud out of Ohio State. When we talked about rookies in the pre-draft season, he was my favorite. By the way, we have Mr. Rookie Scouting Portfolio, Matt Waldman, with us right now, so he can give us some great insight on Garrett Wilson. But when you got a guy getting 34% of your targets, as he did last week, it kind of takes stuff away from everybody else. Elijah Moore, who everybody was so high on, in the first 2 weeks, Matt, 14% of the targets, 12% of the targets. They're still feeding Corey Davis, who was a first-round pick. Still, Braxton Berrios got a little run week 1. Tyler Conklin looking good. And they've got 2 really good running backs who can come out of the backfield and catch the ball. So this Jets offense, as much as I hate Robert Saleh, the head coach, and I dislike just this whole, I don't know, I feel like the whole quarterback situation is terrible. I think they're going
to aware of your hate.
Yeah, what did Robert Saleh do to you?
I don't know.
What's going on, man? We're both coming to bat for him.
Yeah, I think he's phony. I thought he wasn't a great D coordinator in San Francisco, and he had a lot of talent around him, but I don't know. I'm holding receipts for guys coming out. But so let me ask you, first of all, about Wilson and how special can he be? Because a lot of our listeners, I'm sure, just scooped him up on the waiver wire. And then conversely, what does this do for Elijah Moore? And maybe this all changes when Zach Wilson comes back in a few weeks. But right now, it looks like Garrett Wilson is the apple of Joe Flacco's eye.
Oh, he is. And right now, what's nice about it is when you watch the tape with him, the good is that obviously the quick twitch is showing up. The ability to get yards after the catch is showing up. The confidence to target him in tight coverage or tight zone windows is there with Flacco and Wilson, and they're featuring him both inside and outside. So they're moving him around and either getting him. They usually, when they line him up inside, they're using him a lot over the middle on either quick hitters or zone routes like digs or crossing routes to get the most out of him as a receiver. And something that he's improved upon immediately is his ability to transition downhill after the catch. Because to me, the biggest thing with him is he would try too hard to try and make too many people miss, and he would be willing to lose yardage to try and gain more and wind up getting tackled before he even got going. And he's learned how to transition downhill faster. He's kind of what people hyped Marquise Lee to be, but Marquise Lee never got to be that player due to some disciplinary reasons in terms of how he approached his work and injury. And I think Garrett Wilson is on that track to be what people hope Marquise Lee would become. And they're also featuring him on fade routes on the outside. He had multiple fade route opportunities, not only against the Browns, but he also had some against the Ravens last week. So they're using him in ways where he's paired with Corey Davis, who is more their intermediate vertical guy on longer developing plays. And they're flip-flopping them inside and out so that they're getting some nice opportunities. Whereas Moore is being either used as a predictable gadget on end arounds that never really seem to work all that well, or jet sweeps that don't seem to work all that well, or on shorter routes. And usually on the outside, on the opposite side of these matchup tandems with Davis and Wilson that force the cornerbacks to have to pick their poison and have these natural rubs and different types of things they want to do with their stems to confuse people. So Wilson, I think, as long as the big question with that on the negative side is how long is Flacco going to get this opportunity, and is Wilson ready? Because every time Joe Flacco gets into the game, this offense looks different than with Zach Wilson. And the thing that Flacco does very well is throws in the middle of the field very well. Wilson was always a little weaker throwing in the middle of the field. He threw some hospital balls at BYU a fair bit. He can be a little too confident with his arm and his timing and understanding what he can fit in versus the leverage of defenders. And you can see it from last year's targets, where if you look at a heat map of his targets in the middle of the field, other than maybe say the left intermediate seam, which seemed to be pretty strong, the underneath middle and the right and the center and then the right seam were all kind of below average to far below average with his game. And so far, even in training camp, he wasn't really standout on this level. So for me, Garrett Wilson, I think you either take the chance with him and hope that the way they're scheming him on these quick hitters will work out. And if you have the luxury where you added him and you're not leaning on him to start him, maybe you hold on to him. But if you were needing a player and you're starting him, he might be a good opportunity to sell high right now as a rookie and get an established veteran starter with a good quarterback.
Yeah, I got to be honest. It worries me when Wilson comes back, Zach Wilson comes back. It does. And I have, a couple quick numbers that I think are interesting about the Jets wide receivers. Elijah Moore is playing far and away the most snaps, and he is, running far and away the most routes too. So it's not as if he's not out there. And usually this, as a person who used to appear on the Hustle regularly, somebody who likes usage statistics, that's going to point to some success at some point. So what I think is really interesting is that Garrett Wilson came in week one, played less than 50% of the snaps, but that kind of exploded this week to over 60%. And the guy who lost out was Braxton Berrios. So it didn't seem like Corey Davis came off the field anymore. It was Berrios. And, if that snap share continues to rise, Wilson's already leading the team with 22 targets. And I mean, that's a significant amount over the 14 and 12 that Davis and Moore have seen. So this situation is right now it's awesome, but gosh, I'm worried. And I think Matt's the last point that he made about maybe flip Wilson right now, Garrett Wilson right now. That's not a bad point. I like that.
Yeah, and to add to it, just think about these two things. The Ravens in week one, were the team with rookie or injured corners who were not assignment sound. And Cleveland, as a Cleveland Browns fan, I can tell you their defense is designed not to allow the big play. They're not playing tight man-to-man coverage. They're playing a lot of zone. They're playing a lot of back. And Joe Flacco was picking on Grant Delpit, who was a pre-draft favorite of mine. But wherever Delpit was, he picked on him, and there were some assignment breaks on that team. And I mean, Corey Davis's 66-yard touchdown was a total assignment bust. And so those two teams, when we talked earlier in the show about, factoring in, are these defenses playing well right now? Were they? Because it's different when Stephon Diggs faces Jalen Ramsey and wins a 3rd and 12, and you look at a receiver do something like that and go, they went to him against their top guy in a need situation, and he did it, versus this defense got caught napping, or two defenses in a row got caught napping. How likely is that going to happen a month from now versus early September?
It's a Fantasy Football Hustle. We're hanging out here with our guys Matt Waldman, Drew Davenport. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at Matt Waldman. Go check these guys out over at FootballGuys.com. Waldman also has MattWaldmanRSP.com. Drew's at Drew Davenport FF. Did I screw that up in the opening? I said Drew Davenport NFL. You changed it, right?
Did. No, man. Sorry. I thought we were cool, bro.
It was like auction something, or what was it?
We're
or it was
supposed
like
to be
FBG.
buddies. But yeah, like a year ago, man. Come on. But we're supposed to be.
It's that neon
buddies.
sign, man. That's
I hung out in a few too many smoky cars with Drew at the Fantasy Football Expo.
I have no idea what you're talking about. I was not.
Did they
there.
smell funny?
Yeah, hey, I got people in the comments here, Drew, at Drew Davenport FF, talking about your David Bowie vinyl behind you here. What's that all about?
Man, I'm a vinyl. What vinyl
audiophile?
Yeah, audiophile. There we go. Yeah, I love collecting vinyl, and so my brother had this great idea that whatever is playing on the record, he got a little like mini easel here, and then he put the album on the easel. So I stole that idea from him, and every time I play a record, I put it on the easel so everybody can see the album artwork, because that's part of the fun of collecting, right?
Yeah, right. My kids are starting to get into that now. My wife's grandmother just passed 2 weeks ago, let's say, and they're, giving stuff to the grandkids and the great grandkids. And she had some Sinatra vinyl. So she took some of that. And I think we got a Beach Boys, like Pet Sounds or something up there, the original vinyl. So it's cool. So the kids are like, what are these? And like, are these CDs? I'm like, no, this is what people listen to now, but then they got rid of because CDs were way better. But now we're back to vinyl. And I don't know. Matt, you strike me as a vinyl guy.
I'm CDs and vinyl, but this fits our Love Boat Quantum Leap mullet conversation. But I would say that vinyl is far better than all of those things. Plus, you can add some like quality stuff on top of that. So if you got a good stereo system, vinyl's great. And I got a lot of it. But this is like my temporary office right now. But I do have like I've gotten out a couple albums up here that I could share, but I'm a jazzer, so half the people don't even know who I would be showing albums of. So let's not go there.
Quick side story: I took my kids last weekend to Elton John at the Artist formerly known as the Carrier Dome. Loudest concert I've ever been to. I've been to Woodstock '99. I've been to Metallica. I've been to all this stuff. Nothing compares to the sound of Elton John. Holy smoke! You had to leave the arena. Your like seat was vibrating. But
maybe it's because all the audience now is over 60, or half of them is over 60, and they have hearing loss. Maybe they have to hear the vibration at this point.
Yeah, I mean, geez, Louise, they brought Elton John in on a golf cart because he had his hip replaced and he can't walk. And I mean,
wow,
the whole thing. Still, great show.
His movie was great. The movie that's the musical. If you haven't seen it, like it, I'm a big fan of Ray. And I'm a big fan of some of the things like the Aretha Franklin one that they did recently, but it's fantastic. If you even if you don't like Elton John's music, but you like want to know about him, it's an unbelievably creative movie that's worthwhile.
Yeah, there was a kid in our section dressed up in the full like Dodgers gear that he wore.
Oh yeah,
looked amazing. I'm sure he got a few phone numbers that night. Who's your favorite band, Drew?
Favorite band's Manchester Orchestra. Not even a question.
I don't even know what the hell that is.
Most people haven't heard of them. They're actually getting some notoriety. But yeah, it sounds like it's basically like they grew up with a lot of late 90s, early 2000s influences in their songwriting and stuff like that. So come on, man. I thought we were buddies. This is embarrassing.
Yeah, we
got
got
an embarrassing performance from you.
Usually people say, if Drew and I ever had our text messages shared, we would be fired immediately from anywhere that we worked. But we're
telling
not
all the
talking
secrets
about
in one show, bro. Come on.
Quick, Matt, favorite artist, who do you like?
Well, I'll say there's so many I like, so I'll make it quick and say two bands that I really like right now are Snarky Puppy and Lettuce, and they're both funk. Yeah,
Write that down.
Hold on a second.
Let me get Snarky Puppy down. I'm so early 2000s frat boy. I love Dave Matthews Band, Counting Crows. Just went and saw OAR yet again. Love Tom Petty, all that good stuff. Let's play a game here before we get you out of here. I know we told you guys to keep you around 45 minutes here. I want a game.
Yeah.
Keep or drop. All right. So you're looking at your roster today. All we know through 2 weeks. Are we keeping this guy or are we dropping him to the waiver wire? All right. Mr. Waldman, we will start with you. Tom Brady. He's QB 29 right now. Only has a pair of touchdowns. Line's banged up. Everybody is injured around him. Tom Brady, you keeping him or you dropping him to the waiver wire?
Oh, I'm keeping him. Absolutely keeping him because he's still a great pocket mover. You don't have to be mobile. You just have to be maneuverable. He's going to have enough weapons that are coming back. Godwin's coming around. Evans is just suspended for a week. You don't worry about that guy because he will make it work.
Drew, keeping or dropping Tommy Brady?
Yeah, absolutely keeping him. His yards per attempt is a little bit lower than I want to see right now. And his TD rate's a little bit down, but I think that's a function of the injury. So I'm not panicking on Brady, keeping him.
I got somebody in the chat here talking. Is there a song called I Can Feel a Hot One from Manchester Orchestra?
Oh, yeah. Go flip on YouTube when we get down here. I Can Feel a Hot One by Manchester Orchestra. Fabulous.
All right. I got my anytime I go to the internet, I have all sorts of pop-ups that come up on my computer. I don't really know what I did or what site starts with Pornhub. I got those from. But anyways, Tyler Algier. All right. I got him in a lot of leagues. So he can take this lead back role in Atlanta, but what is it worth? We still have to deal with Cordarrelle Patterson. So we have this possible between the 20s grinder with limited upside, only 31% of the snaps in week 2. Matt, I'm sure you saw a lot of him as he's a rookie out of BYU. Tyler Algier, you holding him for this year for redraft or you letting him back to the waiver wire?
Yeah, I would have never even picked him up in the first place. That's
You're
where I'm
killing
at
me.
with
We
him.
should have had you on a month ago.
not a fan. Think that he doesn't read angles very well as a runner or a pass protector. He can catch. He's a try-hard guy. A lot to admire about him, but I don't think he's particularly explosive. Cordarrelle Patterson, if you put him in Derrick Henry's uniform, people don't realize this about him. You put him in Derrick Henry's uniform and just put the visor on with long sleeves, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference in terms of their size.
6'2". He's a big dude.
He's 6'2", 230, 240, and he runs like it. Pete Warner's like the ascending Bobby Wagner in this league for IDP players, okay? And he treated Warner like he was like nothing in the opener. He just ran through him, ran him over. And he's their best runner on the team. It's just that they need to have a change-up guy who can run zone plays occasionally, and they're not very effective as a zone running offense. They're better on gap, and that's what Patterson does awesomely.
6'2", 230. Rumor has it looks like me with a shirt off. Drew, in or out?
Out. It's a simple one. I mean, do we really want an early down grinder on a team that's not going to lead a whole lot? It's the offense isn't that great. They're not going to have a lot of leads this year. I'm out.
All right, a hustle favorite. No one juiced up James Cook's ADP like this show. And so we can thank our boy Dwain for that one. He's found himself in a 3-man committee in Buffalo. They were playing another running back on Monday out there in Buffalo. So James Cook, now he's getting some garbage time that we know they wanted a passing down back, but it looks like Singletary and Moss got the message. And they said, well, hey, we can be passing down backs too. James Cook, maybe you got him 8th, 9th, 10th round or whatever, but I mean, he's doing nothing for you. And unless both guys get hurt, I don't know if he's going to do anything for the rest of the year. Keeping or dropping we'll call it a half-point PPR. James Cook to Matt.
In a shallow league, you drop him because you can probably find other players who are going to have more opportunities. In a deeper league, if you got him there, you keep him because he has more upside than the other two backs based on how they would want to deploy his usage and the big play opportunity that's in his game. But you don't want to keep him over players who are essentially going to get more touches on a regular basis, even if it's a little bit more limited. So it's a little more complicated, but I fail at these quick things all the time.
Drew, keeping or dropping James Cook?
Yeah, I'm out. I've been out on him since week 1, and I know that's weird because, look, we spent all summer talking about his upside and where we could go, where he could go, but this is a situation like I referenced early in the show. If I think this guy is X and then he turns out to be X, then that's all I need to see. And one of the things that I said about Cook all summer long was I don't have any problem drafting him at the back of my roster, especially in my auctions where I'm getting him as my RB4 or RB5. I'm cool with that. But the whole thing about him is I think that he, for fantasy purposes, he profiles as a guy who's going to be useful to the Buffalo Bills, and he's going to be an explosive playmaker on limited touches. But I'm not sure that translates to somebody I want to hold long-term for fantasy success. And I agree with Matt that in deeper leagues, you still want to think about that, about holding him. But in your typical 10 or 12 teamers, I would have already dumped him before this week.
Yeah. Final 2 for 1 here with Chicago Bears. Darnell Mooney, who I've said for years on this program has been overcast or miscast as a wide receiver 1. He, to me, would be great sort of in this Devonta Smith role that he's playing in Philly if there's an alpha on the outside, which he had with Allen Robinson, but Allen Robinson was terrible there. He's got no stat line through 2 weeks, okay? This is Cole Kmet. Cole Kmet has no stat line through 2 weeks. So Darnell Mooney, Cole Kmet. I got ahead of myself on the shittiness of this Bears team. They play slow. They're 31st in the league in plays. They're dead last in dropbacks. So you drafted Mooney as a wide receiver 2. He's being out-targeted by Equinemius St. Brown. So Cole Kmet and Darnell Mooney, are we holding them or are we dropping them, Matt Waldman?
Oh, dropping them. I'm good with both of them on that front. Just from the standpoint with the tight end, you can find tight ends with good matchups every week. If you messed up on Kmet and it doesn't work out for you, you should be able to play those matchups. And with Mooney, to me, he always reminded me of Taylor Gabriel, which meant exactly what you're saying. That's more of a middle class version of Devonta Smith. And the way I loved how you described Devonta Smith as an Eagles fan on top of it. Like you didn't see green here and lose your mind about Devonta. And the way you described him was perfect. So yeah, I'm dropping both.
Wait till you hear me talk about Jalen Hurts. Drew, what are we doing with these Bears?
Yeah, I love your quote. I think I'm going to use this going forward. I got ahead of myself with the shittiness because my some guys in my home leagues, they laugh at me. They're like, you had the guy on your team for like 5 minutes and you dropped him. And I'm like, look, got ahead of myself on the shittiness. What can I say?
5 minutes too long.
Yeah, no, I'm in agreement too. No on both of these guys. And dude, it's wild to me. You already pointed it out, but 28 passes they've thrown through 2 weeks. The only guy who's been playing football who has less passing attempts is Jimmy Garoppolo, and he's got 21. I mean, that's astonishing to me. I don't know what the heck they're doing, but just be done with it.
Let's hit some quick stuff from the chat here as we're coming up on an hour of the show. It's a Fantasy Football Hustle. Make sure you're leaving us a 5-star review on iTunes. Go over to YouTube, hit like, subscribe. You kids know how it works. All right. If you're on Twitch, I'll send you a t-shirt. God bless you for watching us on Twitch. So Matt, this one's for you. It goes back to my Eagles. You were very high on Trey Sermon when he came out of Ohio State. I believe you had him as your running back 1 because we spoke to you that year.
I did.
Do you think that this is from a troubled mind in our YouTube chat? Thoughts on the Eagles giving Sermon time to learn the playbook before unleashing him mid-season? I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but I thought it was a nice depth add, which you give up nothing for, to have a talented young kid on your practice squad.
Yeah, and I mean it was reported by Kyle Posey, who works with the writes and covers the 49ers, that the 49ers and Eagles tried to consummate a deal for Trey Sermon before they cut him. Mm-hmm. So obviously they had a higher grade on him. At least high enough to say, Well, if the 49ers gave up on him, mainly because he didn't fit their system. He just, that was the thing with my pre-draft analysis of him, was that the worst, I listed the worst possible system fit for him was the 49ers. And then I hoped post-draft that because they traded up, because Shanahan had the experience with Devonta Freeman, that maybe he wanted more of an inside guy, and having Trey Lance, being using a little bit, maybe zone read would be the possibility. I overthought that, and ended up missing on my assessment post-draft with him. But when you look at Sermon, he just overthought a lot of things. And I think they felt like, because he's such an instinctive and very good conceived back in terms of cutbacks and identifying all those things, that in an offense where they just said, don't think meat, just give it the gas, just hit that crease as hard as you can. And if it's not there, still hit it, because we'll eventually make one for you. We don't want you to cut back. He couldn't turn that off. And I think that's a part of running back processing that people don't understand, and even coaches still have issues with, is that they think that processing is really an instinctive thing as opposed to a learned behavior. And so he's a much better fit with a lot of the inside zone stuff that the Eagles do. But Miles Sanders is playing well enough. And as long as he's playing well enough, they're going to keep rolling with him unless there's an injury. Now, if there's an injury and Sermon's ready, he's the most ready to be the high carry count back out of Gainwell and Boston Scott. I love Boston Scott as a late round player, but you can tell the team doesn't trust him, because for running back size, he's a shrimp. And they just, and coaches seem to be like, I want guys who can hold up. So we'll use him, but it's going to be a 3-back committee unless Sermon just shows up and looks like rare form from Ohio State right off the bat. And I don't expect that to happen. I would just take it one step at a time with him. Means that you're not holding him right now. You're monitoring what's going on. And then if there's, if you start to see him get a couple carries in games, maybe in deeper leagues, you add him if you have the luxury. If somebody gets hurt, then you make it a priority to preemptively add him where you can, or bid on him.
Eagles were also in on trying to draft J.K. Dobbins last year. So they were definitely looking for some help, and Miles
my
Sanders
other number one
won't be there. Yeah. All right, Drew, we got a trade question for you. Let's throw this at you first here from our pal Kneecaps. This must be Dan Campbell's burner. All right, I got Jamar for Carr and Devonta Smith. Is that a good trade? Is a super flex half PPR. My QB1 is Josh Allen. My other receivers are Cooks, Adams, and London. So when he says Jamar, is that Jamar Chase? Jamar
I sure hope
Jefferson?
So. I hope it's not Jamar Jefferson.
We're getting third string backup running backs for the Lions. I think he got cut. He's not even on the Lions anymore.
That's an amazing trade.
It's got to be Jamar Chase.
Yeah, it's got to be. I mean, it's a super flex, so I understand that the quarterback has more value, but I guess I'd like to know who his QB2 is after trading Carr, because I do like Carr this year. But I think it looks like a nice deal for him. So yeah, I'm a fan of it.
Let me throw a trade question at you, Mr. Waldman. Trade Christian McCaffrey and Darren Waller for Austin Eckler and Gabe Davis or Jamar Chase. We can get Jamar Chase as a throw-in. I love this league.
If anything that says Jamar Chase on the end of that, you could have said basically a garbage can filled with like awful, odious waste and Jamar Chase, and I would probably at least consider it seriously. But McCaffrey and Waller, while they're both good players, getting Eckler and Chase, I would feel pretty good about that, because I think Chase is going to continue to rebound, and you take Chase right away. Davis is, you want matchup players as opposed to scheme players. Good scheme players can be productive like Gabe Davis, but those are guys who the offense is really geared towards, like, we devote all our resources to like create a scheme play to trick the defense to get this guy open, or he's the third option and the quarterback has to buy time to get to him. And Davis is more that guy than Jamar Chase being the guy to go, who's your best corner? It's 3rd and 18, and we need this play to keep this game alive. Who are we going to? You're going to Jamar Chase, and they'll still scheme things open for him. So yeah, Chase and Eckler, I'll take that chance, because Baker Mayfield to me has had some good moments on film, but he's still like just a hair outside or just a hair inside or hair on routes that should just be automatic. And he's never as good in the pocket as people realize. So I'm a little more worried about the long-term effectiveness of that offense. Whereas Waller, I'll give up Waller to get Jamar Chase and Eckler, even though McCaffrey will still probably be fine. But I think that Chase gives you that extra sweeten.
Finally, it wouldn't be a fantasy football podcast if we didn't ask about Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts through 2 weeks has 10 targets, 4 receptions, and he has duplicated his stat line each week, 2 for 19. He's basically running as a decoy out there for the Atlanta Falcons. I don't know if this is Arthur Smith calling the plays. I don't know if this is Marcus Mariota not finding him, but it's troubling for people who drafted Kyle Pitts in the 2nd or 3rd round. Drew, let me start with you. I mean, that's all you heard this week is people, do I trade Pitts? Do I hold him? What do I do with this guy? What are you doing with Kyle Pitts?
Well, I still think that he's going to be fine. I'm not super concerned. I know that last year, I know when we compare year to year, sometimes that loses a little punch. But I know the Saints were a tough matchup on tight ends last year in general, and they came right out of the gate in both weeks. What's weird to me is that they get him a catch like almost right away, right out of the gate. Like, hey, this is what we got to do, and it's like they forget about him. But so I don't understand that, and I think that Matt's probably going to have some takes on whether or not he's getting open and Mariota's just not seeing him. But I can tell you from a usage standpoint, the usage is pristine still. Like I'm not worried about that. He's playing 90% of the snaps. He's running routes. Week 1 was only 76%, but last week was 91% on their dropbacks. So I'm not too concerned about the utilization yet. I still believe in him. I still think he's going to be all right. But Matt probably has a better take on the film side of it.
Well, I mean, I can tell you that just one little data point that I did here is that 50%, if I'm correct, 50% of his routes were against cornerbacks so far, which is a very high number compared to other tight ends who get matched up against linebackers and safeties. Mm-hmm. So they're not doing a great enough job of being able to find those matchups. That is something that will probably improve. Secondly, Mariota is from what I've been seeing, they put him in a lot of mirrored concepts. And when you give a quarterback a lot of mirrored concepts where you have both sides of the field running the same routes, mm-hmm. With the same, that tells you that the quarterback's probably not great. The more mirrored concepts you have, the less confidence they have in the quarterback probably reading the field, full field at a high level. And there's a lot of design roles and a lot of schemed plays, which tells you that with and they've encouraged Mariota to run a little bit more too. So that tells you that he's not processing the field at a high speed that you would get, say, from a veteran like Matt Ryan. So if Desmond Ridder is the wild card here, it could be even worse with Ridder with some of the things that he does as a rookie, but it could also be a lot better with him because he might just say, damn everything, and I'm going to squeeze that ball in the pits and make it happen, and he is more of an aggressive big arm guy who will hang in the pocket some or be a little bit better at buying time, whereas Mariota can run fast, but he's more in the pocket. He tends to self-destruct a bit. So yeah, overall I'd keep Pitts because at the end of the day, you can find another tight end and stream tight ends and wait to see if the Pitts thing ever works out for you and get reasonable production. If you just want to occasionally try and play the matchups with him, if you get impatient, but I don't think you're going to get the value for Pitts that you would like compared to what happens if he does hit, and you're going to regret it if he does.
And talk about value. I mean, I don't know how I can put a price tag, folks, on the knowledge you just got dropped on you from our good friends, Matt Waldman and Drew Davenport. Again, follow them on Twitter at Matt Waldman, at Drew Davenport FF. They both work over at Football Guys. You can catch Matt, check out his podcast that he does. He does the Audible. He's got the RSP cast that's really informative. If you like X's and O's and break it down film, you want to check that out. And of course, Drew does the Auction Brief, which is one of my favorite podcasts and has grown leaps and bounds. Gentlemen, thanks so much for stopping by the Fantasy Football Hustle. For everybody out there, we appreciate you hanging out with us. Follow us on Twitter at FF Hustle on Instagram. And one of these days, we'll make a TikTok. Yeah, probably not. All right. For Matt, for Drew, I'm Drake. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week. And remember to never get out hustled.